There's no question about the scope of the geography of the Book of Mormon, because there are hundreds of statements and inferences in the book, or from the book, that say it had to be a limited area.
I believe it was very confined in what is called Mesoamerica, with the narrow neck of land being the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. I know that many Latter-day Saints think it took place all over North and South America, but the vast majority of Book of Mormon scholars, and even some general authorities, believe it took place in a very limited area.
The distances that were involved in their references suggest that it could not, their territory could not have been greater than, say, 500 or 600 miles at the outside long and a couple of hundred miles wide. All of the events referred to in the Book of Mormon took place there.
The best evidence there is the distances they have to travel. For example, you've got one instance where I think it's the greatest amount of days it took to travel was 22 days. And then there's another account where traveling from the Lamanite capital, which ironically was the city of Nephi, to the Nephite capital, which was the city of Zarahemla, it took 12 days. Well, that's not a lot. That's not a great distance.
Not thousands of miles. That the book does not say, does not claim, does not hint at. So there is a geography around a narrow neck of land that accommodates all of the movements and all of the distances, but it limits it to a few hundred miles in extent.
It was obvious to early members of the church, talked about a land northward, a land southward, and a narrow neck of land. It was the most obvious conclusion in the world to assume that that meant North America, South America, and then Central America, the Isthmus of Panama. But in fact, when you look at the distances in the Book of Mormon, of which there are a great many given, a few days' journey here, a few days' journey there, you realize this area can't be more than a few hundred miles on any side. It's a very small area. Again, much like biblical Israel or Palestine. The fact is, we all believe, John Sorensen believes, John Clark believes, I believe, that we probably have found Book of Mormon cities. We just don't know, because there aren't inscriptions informing us of what their names were. We don't know the names of these cities.
I'm not aware of any of them in Book of Mormon times where scholars know the native name for that site. When the Maya began carving the glyphs into stone so that they were preserved, one of the things that they would carve into stone is called an emblem glyph. And the emblem glyph is a set of pieces of information all put together that long ago scholars recognized was specifically connected to a certain site. It hasn't been until I think the last 10 years or so that they've been able to apply some phonetics to some of those emblem glyphs and retrieve some of the earlier names. The knowledge of those names, again, has to come after AD 250 because that's when they started carving them. Most are going to come after 400, AD 400. You have to be lucky enough to find one that we can interpret, and you've probably got a handful. The next issue with the handful of glyphs that we can identify is that they all come from areas that are outside of what's considered the geography for actual Book of Mormon peoples.
Now, Palenque is outside the area that John Sorensen, for example, identifies as Nephite and Lamanite lands.
Palenque has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon. In the geography that I espouse, Palenque belongs in the east wilderness of the Lamanites. And Palenque was a nothing little, not even a town, just a kind of a village until after 400 AD.
So that's, again, a straw man. It's not a serious point. He could have stood in St. Louis and made the same point about St. Louis. It was built much later. It has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, and it's therefore not a Nephite city.
Before, say, 1000 AD, we know none of them.
The last article I looked up indicated that there are, I think, 30 some odd emblem glyphs where we knew the emblem glyph, which means that the maximum number of names that we could know would be 30, and I don't think we know that many.